kam niryatayami. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam lai chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye druparasho. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam lai chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye druparasho. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam lai chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chishe gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye druparasho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Visto che siamo in tanti, cambio un attimo il microfono che l'altro si sente un po' meglio.
Just changing my microphone, given that there are so many people present today. You'll be able to hear me better with this one.
Eccoci qua. Innanzitutto mi fa molto piacere che siamo qui insieme.
First of all, I'm really happy that we're all here together.
La ragione per la quale mi fa piacere
And the reason why it makes me so happy mostly is because we have the tendency to often spend a large part of our lives taken by things that we need to resolve. The Atisha, the master of the 11th century, said during the day we're distracted, at night we're sleeping, and life goes by quickly. The things that we need to do are many. The things to know are many. And so we need to discern. We need to be able to discern between what's important and what's not, so that we can dedicate our energy appropriately. And we spend a lot of our time resting or with surviving, following pleasures, our survival. And a part of that is fine. I don't see any problem. But there's a fundamental point. The fact that each one of us, wanting to or not, we live our lives, we live our existence, every experience through ourselves, through this filter of self. None of us is able to live something, experience something, to see somebody, experience a situation, a place, whatever it is. None of us is able to live it if not through the filter of ourselves. And every once in a while we say, oh, let's say that it's important to reflect on this filter of ours. And also think about how we're constantly trying to resolve problems, trying to get pleasures, avoiding what we don't want. This kind of automatic reaction that we have to life and situations. And it takes up a lot of our life. So it's important to stop every once in a while and reflect on this. reflect on what I'm doing, where I want to go, who am I, where do I want to go. This is very important, and I'm very happy to be here as well because personally, in all of these years, um, moments like this, moments to share, and in life, I I have this responsibility to be seated here. But in these years, let's say that the context in which I learned the most is when I'm teaching, when I'm sharing, and it's a very important. So it's very important for me. So introduction to Buddhism, and it's important. It's beautiful because we go to the essence. Those who are getting close to Buddhism for the first time, or to those who have been following Buddhism for 30 years. It's important for everyone because without the foundation, you 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 can't have a stable house, regardless of whether you put in pretty windows or not. So today I really want to talk about this foundation. Actually, it goes beyond Buddhism itself, really. And what I believe is that we live our world, we live life through this filter of self, and this filter has many parts, characteristics. If we want to use analogy, we have many filters through which we see reality. There's a filter that has to do with our physical body, our genetics. Riki Gyu Genten in Tibetan, these characteristics that come from our family lineage, our genetics, we would say today, and we're influenced by our family lineage, our ancestors. And there are studies that show that there are aspects, character, charac- mm, aspects of our character that are handed down from generation to generation. So the experience that our ancestors lived have an influence on us today. And whether we want to or not, we live our life through this filter. We have another filter, which would be all the predispositions that we've developed in this life and in previous lives. And we have filters that come from all the information that we've received. We were born and we've grown up in a certain context where we had a certain education. Our parents have given us certain information, friends, other kind of information. At school, we learned something. We've read certain books, certain films, and up to the messages that we've read today. And what I'm saying now, all the information that we've received up till now, they shape a part of our worldview. It's a very important filter. And then we have another filter, which has to do with all the experiences we've had. Because what I understand is one thing, but what I actually experience is another. So no matter how much I'm told that this is a good thing, but when I do that thing, I feel bad, um, I'm going to trust my experience, which has a much stronger voice than what I've been told. And then we add a fifth filter, which is our physical body in the present moment. We are strongly influenced by the state of our body and the environment around us in the present moments. This influences us. But my main point here is that whether we want to or not, each one of us, we live and we experience every situation through ourselves. And through this filter of self, there's an important part of our paradigm that we have actually inherited, that we didn't create. There's a part of our worldview that is not something that we invented in this lifetime. It's something that we inherited in this social, cultural context with which we were raised. For example, the first time I saw something, there's something that I saw, and the first time it really helped me understand, and it's this story of pink and blue. And if I take a blue T-shirt and a pink T-shirt, and I have two children, a boy and a girl, which one, which one would you give to the boy? Which one would you give to the girl? The pink to the girl, and the blue to the boy. Why? Because that's the way it is. That's the color for boys, and and pink is for girls. There's some people, some people, even if you see a boy dressed in pink, one might say, might have some kind of some judgment on that. But why do we say that blue is for boys and pink is for girls? This is something that we have inherited. And actually, this story began in 1918. In 1918, with Industrial Revolution, so colored cloth became accessible to the masses. Because before, if a family wasn't extremely rich, what color would children be dressed in? They would be beige, brownish, so cloth that was not dyed. If you look, for example, at the biography of Saint Francis, when he renounces to riches and wealth, and where he says, "This is not the life I want," he takes all of his expensive cloths, and he throws them out of the window. Because the dyed cloth, especially, it was a symbol of wealth and power. But at the time, people weren't used to buying dyed cloth. But in 1918, it became accessible to many, these dyed cloths. So the marketing campaign of 1918, those who were selling clothes, children's clothes to others, they were teaching people what the color is for boys and for girls. And they were following the fashion of French nobility. And in French nobility, pink was for men, and light blue was for women, because they thought that pink was a stronger color and light blue was softer. So pink for baby boys and light blue for baby girls. After 2 years, it's not like today where you buy clothes every 3 months, every 6 months. You feel anxious and you need to go out and buy clothes. Before, people would buy clothes and they would keep them as long as they lasted. But with Industrial Revolution, to keep up with production, they needed to invent needs that didn't exist. So in 1920, they decided that to get people to buy more, they changed the colors around. So the marketing campaign in 1920, the girls should be wearing pink and the boys light blue. And I don't think that they could do that, change it every year, every 2 years. They found other ways to get us to buy more. But now after 104 years, and here we are, blue and pink. This is a very banal example. I mean, who cares about the colors? But how many things that we take as objective, take for granted, when actually there's a history behind it. There's something that someone at some point decided or that influenced someone else's mind, that changed that person's mind, etc., etc., and it became a rule, like a green lawn. Outside, there's a beautiful green lawn, but where does the green lawn come from? The origins are not very beautiful. Actually, the green lawn in front of a house comes from France with the nobility because the ground was used to cultivate the land, and it was expensive. So when you had a little bit of land, you would do everything possible to cultivate it as best as you could. And those who were very rich, to show how rich they were, in front of their house, instead of a garden, a vegetable garden, they would put down a green grass, or things that they didn't need, to eat. And people could say, look how rich they are. They can just use up the wealth of land to put down grass. So when we look back at this history of things, then our way of perceiving them changes. It's important for us to understand that we live within a paradigm, and this paradigm, a lot of it, we have inherited, for better or worse. It's fundamental to understand that each one of us, we live within our paradigm. And I can change it. I can see things differently because the way I see things changes the way I experience something. Today, before coming, I was talking to a friend someone from our center who fell, and she broke her wrist. So she needs to have surgery, and she said, I thought that she said, I thought that I would have surgery today, but then I have to wait until Tuesday. And I said, well, what good news? That means that you're not a priority. You're not a priority, meaning that it's not so serious. Because if it were very serious, the doctors would make sure that you had surgery right away. And she said, thank you for showing me, helping me see it differently in a more positive light. So all of us, each one of us, we have strength within that pushes us to do everything that we do. And this strength is the attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering. We all want to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. And we all do everything that we do thinking that it's the best for our own happiness. And where we project what we think is going to make us happy and what makes us suffer, a lot of it comes from our social, cultural context and what we've inherited, what we've lived in the past. And a fundamental point of Buddhism is that Buddha Shakyamuni, about 2,500 years ago, he shared his worldview. He shared how he experienced and saw reality, saying, this works for me, why don't you try it? And in this process of trying to find happiness, there's an actual first, we'll talk about Buddha's vision. I will talk about the 4 views, but before that, very quickly, when we try to be happy, which we all do, from the ant to the elephant, all beings, we're all trying to avoid suffering, and we try to be happy, to be well. And there are two types of suffering. There's a physical suffering and there's mental suffering. As we develop our social cultural um, um, existence, we've been wonderful at avoiding physical suffering. We've invented techniques to avoid physical pain, techniques to be warm when it's cold outside, to be cold when it's hot outside, to make to grow more and more food, to not have to tire, to do physical activity, to have clean water. So this society in which we live, to avoid physical suffering, w- we've managed quite well, haven't we? And within this, the only problem that I see is that to avoid physical suffering, we've created this idea of the minimum effort, maximum comfort. And so we've gone really beyond our limits. So instead of having always enough to eat, to not be hungry, we eat too much, and that leads to other sufferings. But the point is that we've managed quite well to avoid suffering, physical suffering. But does this mean that we've been able to avoid suffering in general, mental suffering? When we avoid physical suffering, does mental suffering cease? Actually, today we see that the level of psychiatric problems, etc., is 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 increasing um, in an outrageous rate. After the pandemic, there was an increase in psychiatric pathologies, and after the pandemic, it was expected for the cases to go back to normal, but instead they keep growing. So physically, we've been able to manage quite well, avoiding suffering. Um, of course, there are many things we could better, but even though we've been able to do that, it doesn't mean that we have a healthy lifestyle, but that's another subject. But mental health instead, mental suffering, we have not resolved much. It's actually the opposite. To try to face these two ways of suffering and to reach a well-being, both physical and mental. I mean, man has tried many different ways, and these two ways have been developed in two different ways. We have two different roads. This is the first crossroads. The first, I call it materialistic utopia, is where we believe, and you live as a consequence, that it's possible to reach a state of balance and well-being, to be free from suffering and to be well, mostly thanks to external conditions. So the day the people around me will act in a certain way, that I'll be able to have my my soulmate, that work goes the way I want it to go, that I can have the money that I think that I need. When it all goes the way I want, everything will be fine. Where every time we have some inner malaise, we project it mostly on an external cause. And as a consequence, we look for the solution outside. Is that clear? And this is, in just a few words, this is the first view. And you can divide that actually into two. Those who believe that it's possible to reach this state of peace and happiness, well-being, this state of nirvana, if we want to use a Buddhist term. Nirvana means beyond suffering, transcends suffering. Those who think that it's possible to reach that with material things outside in this life, and there are those who believe that that it's possible to reach that state after this life, depending always on external causes and conditions. But the idea is, if I'm in the right place, everything will be fine. Is this clear? Because the definition that we give to heaven, and this has nothing to do with the Christianity or Buddhism. Every religion has a different idea of heaven. But in comparing many religions, there's this idea of paradise, of heaven, a place where one will have everything they want, will be free from everything that they don't want, and beautiful things, wonderful things will last forever. So it's the same idea that if externally everything's fine, I will be fine. And this is the first view that exists, and it's part of a paradigm, a worldview. And we're part of this, aren't we? So when we don't feel well and we ask ourselves why, normally do we point our finger inside or outside? Mostly outside. And as a consequence, we look for solutions that are outside. The second view is described in a certain spiritual context that goes beyond Buddhism, where we talk about being able to reach this nirvana, this state that goes beyond suffering, mostly through internal conditions and not external conditions. When I suffer and I look for the cause, the main cause, it's not outside, but it's inside. And here, that shows a very important crossroad. So Buddha's worldview is the second one. But let's look at our own personal experience. Which of the two matches our own experiences more? In Buddhism, it's explained that we have certain needs that are divided into four. Well, they can be classified in different ways, but let's start here. 4 types of necessities. And they're also in order. First, I need to satisfy that first need to then satisfy the second. I can't satisfy that second need if that first isn't covered. And I like imagining them like containers that we need to fill. The first container, these are material needs that we have. For example, within the UN, there's an annual happiness report. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a huge book that they publish every year. One year, I read it a little bit, and there I saw that there was a study that asked people if money brought happiness or not. And the answer that this study gave, and I agree fully, the answer was yes. Money brings happiness up to a certain point. There's a threshold. The threshold, what is this threshold? If I don't have money to eat, if I don't have money to drink clean water or protect myself from heat or cold, if I don't have the minimum necessary to survive, then I am going to suffer regardless of my situation. But once I've crossed that threshold, anything else that I add is not going to increase my level of happiness. This is what this study said, and I believe it. When that first container is full, when that first container is empty and I can't take care of my health and I can't feed myself, I can't protect myself from the elements, I suffer. And there are really just a few things that we really need. Instead, when that container is full, it doesn't matter how much I add. It's not that it overflows and fills up the next container. No, those other containers would stay. It just needs to be full. And our container related to basic necessities, in your opinion, is it full? Is it empty? No, it's quite full, isn't it? But once it's full, I mean, do we stop trying to fill it? Or would we just keep filling it, trying to fill it? But the problem is that by filling up the first one, it doesn't fill up the second one. The second one has to do with our emotional needs, our need for human connection, to give love, to feel love, to see others, to be seen, to be trusted and give trust, to feel this human connection, mostly through affection. And there are times where we feel these needs, where we feel the lack of affection, or for some kind of inner conflict that we have. I mean, this can happen, right? Have you ever tried to satisfy this need by filling the first one? I'm sad, let me go shopping. I'm sad, let me watch a good movie. I'll do something else to forget this sadness, to try to get that momentary happiness. Because when we fill up that first container, the trap is that once that first container of material needs is full, but we keep adding stuff, in that first instant, it generates dopamine and is pleasurable, but cannot sustain a state of happiness. And so when we have a moment where there's a moment of lack of emotional, some kind of empty feeling, and when we try to fill it with that first container, it doesn't work. It's not sustainable, because that second need is emotional. It's about connecting with others, about giving love, feeling love, and it's extremely important. Extremely important. If we wanted to make a kind of correlation, it's not exactly precise, but if we wanted to talk about these like chemicals, we could say that the first one is connected to dopamine, and the second one has more to do with serotonin, connected to human connection. And the third need is about living in a safe place, because if we're with someone that we love and loves us, and we have what's necessary to cover our basic needs, but if we live in the middle of a war zone, then it's just not enough to be happy. I mean, we take for granted that we live in a peaceful place, but the fourth need is the fourth need is a spiritual need. the need to give meaning to life, the need to have an answer to the question, what am I doing with my life? And these various needs need to be lived and seen, nourished. So on a material, from a material point of view, it's right that we need to work and take care of this part of our lives, but it's not enough. The spiritual part says the um, minimum necessary to cover our basic needs is fundamental, because without that, we cannot cover the other needs. Someone who doesn't have enough to eat, this person doesn't have space to think about anything else. The person who's hungry needs food. When these needs are covered, then we need to move on to the others. We put effort into covering our emotional needs, be it within our family, within a couple, at work, with successfully and not so successfully, but we do put effort there. But there's beyond this, there's also the part, how do I live? How do I live the world? What's my view? Because this is fundamental, because the way I live the world, it determines how I interact with the world. So today what I want to talk about is, I want to talk about the 4 seals, the 4 pillars that sustain the view that Buddha shared. And it says that these 4 pillars need to be present for it to be called a Buddhist thought or teaching. It's a kind of like a seal of quality. And for it to be a Buddhist teaching, these 4 seals need to be present. Buddha taught in different ways to different people with different capacities and needs. So even when Buddha passed away, his disciples came together and they said, he told me this, and other disciples said, well, he said this to me, and there were things that were apparently contradictory. But then we put them all together, we can see that they're not contradictory, but we can see that according to who he gave the teachings to, they all bring the same direction. It's like when we help someone, we as helpers need to adapt ourselves to the one who needs help. And at the beginning, we need to see who is asking for help and adapt ourselves. So if I have something to explain, I need to adapt myself. Otherwise, I can just So I explained everything to you. I explained it to you. Yeah, I did my part. But I said it in Tibetan. Maybe someone has understood, but when you explain something to someone, the first thing you need to do is understand who you have in front of you. It's useless that I try to explain something to you in a way that you're not able to understand. And so one ability that Buddha had was adapting himself to the necessities. There's one story that is a little extreme. And this king named Makyatra in Tibetan, this king, before becoming a king, he killed his own parents, actually. It's a complex story. It seems like they were very sick. He didn't want to see them suffer. Anyway, he killed his parents. And then Buddha had said that there are 5 actions that are called heinous actions, the worst things you could do. And among these 5 heinous actions, one is killing one's own parents. So this is one of the worst things one can do. This king went into a deep depression, feeling incredibly guilty, and he wanted to take his own life. So he was absolutely desperate for what he had done. And Buddha saw that he didn't have any space for any he didn't have any space to forgive himself or think about anything. So what he told him was the father and mother are to be killed, should be killed. And the king, what? Okay, well, the Buddha said so. I trust what the Buddha says. And it gave him space to relax. That sense of guilt diminished a little bit. And then little by little, he got closer to Buddhism, and Buddha explained other things until he was able to understand that father and mother made reference to attachment and aversion and not actually our biological parents. But when he was able to get those teachings, he was in a different mental space where he wasn't about to commit suicide, and he was able to change his own behavior and reach a great state of peace and happiness in his life. So it's said that very often Buddha would adapt to the needs of who he had in front of him. But when all of Buddha's disciples came together, there were many different schools. You know, one would say Buddha said this, no, Buddha said that. I mean, who was right? And that's how this Buddhist schools were born. Originally 4. So the Vaibhasika, the Chittamatra, the Sautantrika, and the Madhyamika. And the first one is divided into 18 teachings because they were 18 different places where Buddha gave teachings that were similar but a little bit different, and they were in harmony, not in contradiction. But they found an agreement among all these these schools. So these 4 points are present in all of Buddha's teachings, and these are the 4 seals, the 4 pillars. And these help us understand to have a different worldview, and they help us get closer to understand the view that that Buddha shared, without getting into too many details. It's called all composed phenomena are impermanent. That's the first one. Everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. All phenomenon are free of their own self and lack inherent existence. And beyond suffering, there is peace. So now let's look at them one by one. The first point is that everything is in constant change. Everything that we see, everything that we hear is in constant transformation. So when we see the world around us, what we see, what we hear, the objects of our 5 senses, our own mind, our own sensations, our feelings, our own being, they are in constant transformation. Duce means composed phenomenon, that which interacts, that depends on causes and conditions. And impermanent means that it's in constant transformation. But let's look at our own view. How do we see things? As being impermanent or as being permanent? If I asked you, these flowers here, these flowers here, are they static or are they in constant transformation? What would you say? Will they always stay like this? Or there's a constant process of transformation because there's an interaction. There's the plant and the atmosphere, the oxygen and the light. All these interactions bring a gradual transformation, a continuous transformation, right? If I put colored water, that will actually influence the color of the flower. So is the flower permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent. Does anyone have any doubt? Now let's look at the flower well. You can see them, even those who are little, maybe those of you are a little bit less if you're far. Now close your eyes and imagine the flowers that you've seen. Now open your eyes again. Can you see the flowers again? Without philosophizing, are they the same flowers? They're the same flowers. And we can spend all day doing this exercise. If we analyze really, is it the same or is it a different object? It's not that it just changes like that. But even if the flower is impermanent, and you don't need a degree in philosophy to understand that it's impermanent, it appears to us as if it were permanent. What do we do in front of this illusory appearance? We take it as true. We're going to see each other today. We see each other today, and we're going to see each other in a week's time. Who do we think we're going to meet in a week's time? The same person that we met today. I mean, it's ignorant, but that's what we do. So reality, even if it's impermanent, it appears to us as if it were permanent, and we interact with this impermanent reality as if it were permanent, creating many, many problems. We're upset when it ends, or upset when it's not like it was before. Let's try quickly. Why? I mean, why? Even if it's impermanent, why do I see it as being permanent? Let me give you an example that I've done many times, but it's really one of the best examples.
Non c'ho voglia di utilizzare tutto il fazzoletto.
Okay. Can you see this well? Are the four sides the same or a little bit different? This one is so one side is straight, the other one I cut myself. But can you imagine the image of the napkin? You can imagine it, right? But now, is that the same napkin? I mean, don't analyze. Just answer spontaneously. It's the same. And now, is it the same? We can do this until lunchtime, really. Is it the same? And now? Is it the same or not? Those who say it's the same, lend me your car and I'll give you back your car, cut in half, and we'll see if it's the same or not. If it were the same, it would continue being the same. But the reality is as follows. The mental image that we created, the mental image that we created when we first saw the napkin, can you still access that? Yes. But it cannot sustain this object anymore. So now we have a new mental object, right? Which is this. So what happens is this: even if the objects are in constant transformation, we interact and we perceive these objects or these experiences through mental images, which are not in constant transformation. So as long as the napkin, that as long as the action can sustain that first mental image, for us it was the same, even if in reality it wasn't the same napkin. But it appeared to us as being the same because the mental image that we had constructed could sustain that object. But when that mental image cannot sustain the object and we need to create a new mental image, we say the object has changed. A person, for example, maybe someone has a very detailed image of someone, maybe someone has a very gross level image of someone. You know, the more detailed your view of someone is, the more you are able to perceive changes. If your view is coarse of that person, then you're able to perceive changes less. So every time we meet someone, we see something, it's almost as if we take a photograph. And as long as that object, the situation, the person corresponds to that photograph, we say that everything's the same. But the day that it doesn't correspond, we say that it's changed and we need to take a new picture. Our ignorance is that we believe that our photographs are actually reality. So I'm relating not with you, but I'm relating to you through the mental image that I create of you. And my mental image is not in constant transformation the way you are. And there's an interesting exercise to do every once in a while, which is mental image updating. Especially with people very close to us, it's important to update mental images. Because what's the problem? I generate a mental image of you, and this mental image is not just for you. I put it in some categories. I say you're this person, but you're also a mother, a father, an uncle, your grandmother, a husband, wife, a friend, a teacher. I put you also in a category, and I have an idealized image of you, but I also have an idealized image of that category. And so with a lot of affection, I put you in that category. What happens when you don't correspond to my experience? You don't correspond to what I think that category represents. Or what happens when you don't correspond to the idealized image that I have of you? I say there's something wrong. Something's wrong, you know. What happened to you? You shouldn't be like this. Have you ever heard something like this, or said something like this, thought something like this? Why shouldn't you be like that? I know how you should be. I created this image of you with so much affection, years in the making. And this takes us to something else. When someone says to me, nobody understands me, Lama. And I say, don't worry, no one will ever understand you. Because no one can see yourself the way you see your own self. No one can see you the way you see yourself. And there's another interesting point. Even ourselves, we relate to ourselves we relate to ourselves through an idealized image of ourselves. Have you ever had a little shock of seeing some kind of change or characteristic, physical or of your personality? Have you been shocked? Let me give you a personal example. A few years ago, I was in Holland for a conference, and I don't know why, but I created this idea. A bit changed, but at that time it was very strong. I had this idealized image of myself where I didn't like soup. I even thought maybe because I had lived in India for I lived in India for so many years, and every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even though it was so hot in India, we would have hot Tibetan soup. So even if the Tibetans went from 30 to the 3,000 meters in the cold Himalayas down to the south of India, they still would have a hot soup. So in the south of India instead, where it's always hot, I don't think you need to have soup all the time. But I don't know, maybe I was a little traumatized by hot soup every day in the afternoon. And whatever it is, I created this idea of myself that I didn't like soup, and especially not at lunchtime. At night, if it's cold and there's nothing else to eat, okay, it's passable. So I was in Holland for a conference. It was really beautiful moment. But at lunchtime, what do they give you in Holland? Soup. And I agree with many Italians that the Dutch people don't know how to eat. But this aside, I was there. Even if I don't like soup, I was eating my soup without any kind of a problem. And a friend who knows me really well came by and said, "Oh, Lama, how's your lunch?" And I answered, "Soup for lunch. How do you want my lunch to be?" And what's interesting is, as I was answering, as I was saying, I didn't like my soup for lunch, but it was actually I was enjoying it. The texture was good, the taste was good, but I was telling myself that it couldn't be true because I don't like soup. And after that first bowl of soup, spontaneously, I wanted more. But when I said to myself that I wanted more, I told myself, no, 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 you don't like soup. You can't have more. And I thought about it afterwards, and I thought, this is so silly. How attached I am to this idealized image I have of myself, much more than the actual experience that I was living. So I don't like soup, you know. It's an image of self that may not create too much too many negative effects. But when instead of saying I don't like soup, we say to ourselves, I'm always alone. No one loves me. I'm always abandoned. Those are problems. I'm a sad person. No, there's a moment of joy. It can't be true. Oh, I don't know how to face difficult situations. I'm actually facing the situation well, but it can't be true. Or the opposite. I'm a strong person, and there's a moment of weakness. No, that's not me. But you're living it. No, no, no. I'm not living it. If you're living it, it's part of you. So we have this tendency to interact with everything, including ourselves, through an idealized image. And what's crazy is that we give more weight to the image than to our direct experience. No, you should be like this. You should be the way I think you should be, not what you actually are. So that parents have idealized image of their children, children have idealized image of their parents. But we complicate it even more. We have the idealized image of what I should be, what I should have been, and what I should be in the future. With this, and also valid for for others. I mean, we're complicated. There's also the idealized image of how we are and how we want to be seen and this has to do with everything. Flowers and food and all the situations that surround us. A very simple example, but this can help. Let's say we go to a restaurant. We look at the menu, and as we read the description of the plates, of the dishes, we have a mental image, and I think it's happened to everyone where you ask for something and you're given something else, you're served something else. But the image that we had of that dish doesn't always correspond to the one who's cooking. And one says, "Oh, I didn't ask for this." And one can be upset about it. We are strongly, strongly attached to our mental image. I imagine what's going to happen tomorrow, for example. How that meeting is going to be. What's going to happen in that situation. We try somehow to keep control of the world around us. And most of the time, it doesn't correspond. And we suffer much more because things are not the way we think they should be compared to how things actually are. Is that clear? In the first seal, all composed phenomena are impermanent. Buddha says, relax. We live in an impermanent reality. Everything that we perceive around us is in constant, complex interaction that brings constant transformation. And we can't have control over everything. What we can is to learn how to interact. Another aspect that has to do with this is, let's just think of this present moment. And let's make an analogy. Let's imagine an equation. And everyone who's here chooses a number. Think of a number. And together with that number, you can decide whether you want to you can decide if you want to add, subtract, multiply, divide. And now let's imagine that we really take the time. Each one adds his number plus his mathematical equation, and someone is really good at math and gets to each result as we go along. And then let's say at the very, very end, we get to the number, the final result of 64. But I don't like 64. I was hoping for 52 or 108. I don't think this is right. 64. Who is to blame for this 64 result? Because when we live something that we don't like, we ask ourselves, who is to blame? Is it the last one who gave his number, or the first one, or maybe the one in the middle? The one who gave the high numbers or the low numbers? Those who added, those who subtracted? If I could find the guilty one and say, you're the one to blame. If you had given a different number, we wouldn't have this result. Is that right? If I uh, if I chose any one of you and I said, if you had given a different number, we would have a different result. And that's true. But you could then say, well, what about the person next to me? What about we're all in the same boat. So no one is guilty. 64 is the result of a very complex equation. And in front of this very complex equation, 64, regardless of whether I like it or not, is perfect. It's perfect. It's not random. It's perfect in the sense that all those numbers, the causes and conditions, and the interactions could only bring that result, the result of 64. And so we can say that that result is perfect. It's right. But if I don't like 64, what can I do? I can add other numbers, subtract other numbers, try to interact so I can change that equation, add something to that equation. But this present moment, take into consideration your lives. Give yourselves a moment of time, space, and list. Give an overview, a general vision of your physical situation, your emotional situation, your situation with regard to relationships, feelings, work. And we look at the different aspects of our lives. Look at these different aspects of our lives, and without judging, we just look at them. And we ask ourselves, in this present moment, our life in this moment, is it perfect or is it random? I know it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But like the equation, given all of the interactions, all the causes, conditions, thoughts, interactions, everything up to now, could this present moment be anything but how it is now? So it's important to say, I am perfect. I'd like to be a better perfect, but I'm perfect. It could only be like this. But if I don't like 64, I have time to add another number or subtract a number, because every number changes the final result in our life. Every interaction, every thought, every word spoken changes the result in every sphere of our lives. For example, try to imagine why you're here today. How much had to happen for you to be here today? Or things that happened, or things that needed to happen, or things that didn't happen. I like to think of the example of Lama Michel Rinpoche in the 1970s. I think it was the 1970s. He decided one day to go on retreat, to do a 2-year retreat, and went to a friend, Genla, who then became a teacher of mine. And he says, Genla, I'm going to go on retreat. I've already prepared the place. So know that we won't be able to see each other for 2 years because I'll be on retreat. And Genla, who was a man of few words, generally speaking, he answered, he said, if I were you, I wouldn't be able to recite 100 mantras. I remember she said, why? With all the debts that you have around, people don't ask you for money because they respect you. You're the Lama. But given that we're friends, they come to me hoping that I can influence you. Why did Rinpoche have so many debts? And he was even called the Lama of the poor. He would go around and he would give teachings and healings and ceremonies, and he would go to the poor people because they would have never invited him, because in the Tibetan culture you don't invite a lama if you don't have something to to offer, and they were ashamed, and he knew that, so he would just go by, and as he talked to them, they would tell him their problems, and so he would ask, he would he would borrow money from rich people and give it to the poor people, a kind of Tibetan Robin Hood, but instead of stealing, he would borrow money. And so again, Lakpala answered like this. And at first, Rinpoche was, who was so enthusiastic about his retreat, he was a little bit upset, but he changed his program. He says, okay, I'll accept this invitation to go to the north of India, in the Sikkim, where the mother of the king of Sikkim had problems with her eyes and had invited Lama Ganchen. So he decided to actually go to Sikkim. He helped the mother of the king, and he thought, all the money that I receive, I'll pay back my debts, and then I'll go on retreat. But it went so well in Sikkim that even at dawn, he had many, many people waiting for him, waiting for his healing. So the 3 months in Sikkim turned into 3 years. It went so well. And in the meantime, he went to Nepal, which was very close. And there was this family of Tsetin Yurme who Tsetin Yurme's family, they always supported Lama Ganchen, even in previous lives. And at the time, this family, they had an enormous showroom of carpets, and they used that for these ceremonies. And and there was this man from Greece, Yurgu, who called Tsetin Yurme, saying that he wanted to buy carpets. And Tsetin said, no, you can't, because there's this Lama healer who's doing ceremony. So he came to see him, and he was really, really touched by him and invited him to Greece. Then the story continues. But I asked myself, if Ken Lakpala hadn't said, if I were in you, I wouldn't be able to recite 100 mantras during this retreat, and then Rinpoche hadn't decided to go to Sikkim, and then from Sikkim to Nepal, and to meet our Greek friend, and then come to the West, would we be here today? I mean, I could add example upon example. So every interaction that we have changes radically what comes after. In my personal case, when my mother turned 30, there was a friend of my mother, Professor Charette, who came to my mother's birthday with 2 friends, Claudio and Monica. Monica is a Brazilian friend who works at in the shop. And we brought them and said, this couple of friends, they want to bring this Tibetan Lama to Brazil, and you're the right person to help them. And my mother knew nothing about Buddhism, but she said yes. If she hadn't had that birthday party, or if she had said no, probably I wouldn't be here today. And then I imagine that you wouldn't be here either. But if we took everyone's lives. And if you look back at very small actions, what among those would change the result for today to not be like it is? So every small interaction is not important, it's determining. Just change one number in that equation to change the result. So every equation, every choice that we make, every thought that we have, every word spoken determines our present and as a consequence our future. There's nothing that is in vain and that just ends there. And here we can talk about the law of karma. Well, karma doesn't mean destiny. Karma means interaction, action. Nothing comes from nothing and nothing ends in nothing. Everything that we experience is a result of a very complex interaction of cause and effect. And everything that I do in this present moment determines what I'm going to experience in my future. Is that clear? So, this first seal tells us that we are responsible for ourselves, that our choices determine what we experience, and that we don't have to oppose the present or the past, because the past and the present, given the causes and conditions, they're perfect, but I can act with awareness for the future that I want, because we have free will. How much freedom do we actually have? If we were to give it, like a degree from to 100, so 0 to 180 degrees of freedom to move. In my opinion, 0.1. That, and for me, that would be a high number. Why such a small degree? Because in this present moment, are we conditioned by our past experiences? Are we free from choices we've already made? We're conditioned by those too. Are we conditioned by the interactions around us and the people around us? Are we influenced by the social, cultural, economic situation in which we live? Are we conditioned by our physical state of being? Are we conditioned by the experiences that we've lived? Are we conditioned by our past traumas? We're conditioned by so many things, which means that we can't change anything. We can change, we can choose something within that space. Like we can't buy everything we want. We can, given two conditions. We need the money, and the thing needs to be for sale. And similarly, I can't choose everything I want. I have a range, and within that range of resources that I have and the conditions that are available, so these are resources that depend on me and the resources that depend on something else and on others. So my ability to choose is limited, but in a situation, I can choose to do, not do, to say, not to say, to go, not to go, to be quiet or to speak. Sometimes it's really difficult, but it's possible. We have these small choices, don't we? It's not that our range of choice is so great, because we're conditioned by an infinite number of things, but within that there is the freedom of choice. And every half a degree, if you take a half a degree, it seems like nothing, but but over time, it creates an enormous difference. More and more if you keep adding half a degree to half a degree. So we do have freedom. And this freedom can be found exclusively in the present moment, in our actions, our speech, and our thoughts. So karma says what you're living today, what you're experiencing today, is nothing other than the result of everything that you have lived in the past. That adds up also to external conditions that are present, the others' lives. But what you're going to live tomorrow depends on the choices I make today. This brings us to have a view of the future where we see our present is not simply the result of the past, and that we then act, we just react. No, it gives us a sense of great responsibility for the future that we want. Buddha said, I am my own protector, I am my own enemy. What I do determines what I will experience. So we live in this impermanent reality where everything constantly interacts. And this brings us to a fundamental conclusion, even if it's a little difficult to accept. We are not the victim of anyone or of anything. One of the first necessary attitudes along our path is to stop victimizing ourselves. We're not the victim of ourselves. We're not the victim of any other situation or anyone else. Every situation that every choice that we make determines our future. The second seal, and we'll go a little bit more quickly now, everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. There was a little joke that I used to say when I was about 5, 6 years old, and I would do like this. Everywhere I touch myself, it hurts. I touch my head, it hurts. I touch my shoulder, it hurts. I touch my tummy, it hurts. I touch my nose, it hurts. And I would just go on and on and on. And what sickness do I have? I have the sickness of the finger. Or I have pain in my finger. What does this mean? If I'm not well, I live the world badly. When we perceive something, we perceive it through this filter of self. And if we see that through dissatisfaction, anger, fear, anxiety, sadness, etc., we live it badly. So we pollute what we live through that emotion, and it becomes suffering. So everything impure, not in the sense that objectively it is impure in and of itself, but everything that we pollute with this dirty lens, that becomes an interaction of suffering. In other words, this second seal says our suffering doesn't depend on external conditions, but mostly on inner conditions. For example, I realized not that long ago, actually, because a few years ago, that just in a few days, I experienced something that was quite difficult. It had to do with death, etc. But I lived it actually very well. It didn't unbalance me. I can't say that I suffered. If I could have chosen to live it or to not live it. I would have preferred to not live it, but it was fine. A few days later, there was an experience that was real easy, normal, something in our common way of seeing things. We would see it as something absolutely unimportant, but I lived it badly. It really unbalanced me, and I asked myself, how is this possible? This difficult situation I lived well. This very simple, banal situation I lived badly. And then looking at myself, I realized that that first situation, even if it seemed difficult, it didn't touch anything unresolved within me. The other one, even though it was seemingly banal, it really resonated something unhealed within me. I lived it through this wound. So every time we live our present through our past, this filter of our past. And as long as we live the present through our anger and jealousy, attachment, dissatisfaction, etc., arrogance, miserliness, and other emotional states that are harmful, we live that situation badly. So, what causes suffering is not external causes, but principally, mostly inner causes. To conclude this point, I'd like to make a Buddhist advertising. I've said it many times, and one day we'll try to do it. Let's imagine this ad. It would say something like, observe your life. Allow yourself to imagine your life. Observe your body. Observe your familiar situation, your material situation, every aspect of your life that you have in front of you, the life that you're living. Try to look at it and see it without judging. Now, for just a moment, allow yourself to dream. Allow yourself to imagine. How would your life be? How would your family be? What would your work be? What would your body be? With just a few changes, what would your life be where you were you, but you stop projecting you start projecting onto everything outside of you what it should be? What would your life be if you related to things with less attachment, with more fluidness, with less arrogance and more humbleness, with less anger, more acceptance, more satisfaction? What would your life be like if you could, if you were able to connect to the people around you, if you were able to see others and their needs, if you were able to expand that profound feeling of attraction to your own happiness and that aversion you have to your own suffering? What would it be like if you were able to expand that feeling to include everyone else? If you were able to feel deeply connected to every being around you and you were able to live harmoniously with them? Would you want this or not? Would you want that life? You can buy it in easy installments. And you don't pay those installments economically, but you pay by changing your behavior with body, speech, and mind. And so the question isn't what do I want to do, but who do I want to be? So that second seal is about dreaming about who you want to be. I want to be a joyous, satisfied, balanced, a loving, generous person. Or do I want to be an angry, envious, jealous, dissatisfied person? Who do I want to be? The second seal says it's useless that we're constantly fighting against the world. The key is not about changing the world around us. It's about living our reality in a healthier way. It's as if we were off to sail a boat, and we think that we're only going to sail well if we have the right currents and the right winds. No, we know that regardless of the weather, regardless of the currents and the winds, I have the tools to sail well. So I'm not conditioning myself on external conditions, but my own tools. So in that second seal, we let go of this wanting control over external conditions, and we understand, and we rely on the inner conditions. It's like this. It's very similar to the manual of the Greek Stoic Epictetus, who says there are phenomena of two types: those that depend on us and those that don't depend on us. So our own thoughts, our own choices, our interactions, these depend on us. But this text talks about our body, what others do around us, it's the situations around us. These are things that just don't depend on us. These are external situations. And the text says suffering comes from trying to have control over what doesn't depend on us, and not controlling what actually depends on us. Is quite similar. And Buddha says that the causes of suffering are mostly our ignorance, this grasping at a non-coherent reality, our unlimited attachment and desire, when we project our happiness onto that which cannot sustain it, our anger and forms of anger like resentment and non-patience, and all the actions that we do driven by these negative minds. This all generates suffering. So you go to take a beautiful vacation in a place of your dreams, but if you are envious and jealous and full of fear and anxiety, you're going to bring those things with you, and you'll live that beautiful place through these feelings. A little bit like when I talk to these kids. Have you ever seen an adult that is stressed and complains about being stressed? Has it ever happened that you've gone on vacation and that adult that just stresses also on vacation? Is it because vacation is stressful, or and then the other kids say no, it's because the person is stressed. So it just in a few words, that's the second seal. The third seal is very complex and profound, but very simply said, everything lacks an inherent existence and is empty. It lacks a self. What does that mean? Imagine asking the person next to you if that person sees me. So I see you and you're looking at me. So ask the person next to you, do you see Lama? What would the answer be? Yes or no? Can you see me? Your answer would be yes. Now, let's ask which lama? Which lama? The one I'm seeing. How many lamas are there? There's only one. I asking you if you see that one, the one you see. But without philosophizing, it seems like it matches. But let's analyze this a little bit. Let's start with the sound. Can you hear the sound of the singing bowl? Yes. What singing bowl? The one that's here. I didn't play many, but we can say that we're all hearing the same sound without analyzing, philosophizing. Yes, right? But now let's think about it. Really, let's see how things are. To hear something, we need three things, 3 plus 1. First of all, we need a sensory object. In this case, what's the sensory object? The vibration in the air that we call sound. Then we also need the sense faculty, sound, hearing, and sense consciousness, that part of the mind that catches the actual sound, and then we also need another part of our mind that says this is that or that is that. So this what arrives to our actual hearing, our sense faculty, that sound, those vibrations that come to my hearing, my sense faculty of hearing, is it the same? So to me it comes more directly, but those who are far in the back of these sounds, these waves probably go up and then they come back down. So it's similar, but by definition, as is said in Tibetan, everything that's similar is by definition different. So the sound waves that come to my hearing is different than what comes to your hearing. And imagine those who are listening from home is even more difficult. And what about our actual hearing? I mean, we're all human beings, so it's similar, but it's different. And what about the sense consciousness of each one? Is it the same or different? It's different. The value that we attribute to this sound, the name that we give it, the emotion that we connect, etc., and everything else that comes with this sound, is it the same or different? At this point, is anyone here able to hear the sound that I am hearing? So when I ask you, are you able to hear the sound of the singing bowl? The one that I'm able to hear? No. And so if someone says, can you see Lama? And that person says, which Lama? If you answer the Lama that I see, the answer would be no, because the light reflects differently on the sense object. Our sense faculties of sight are different, and the sense consciousness of form is also different, and also the discernment that we attribute, the name that we attribute, the meaning is all different. So it's all subjective, because we all experience everything through ourselves, which doesn't mean that external reality doesn't exist. It's there, it's solid. No matter how much I believe that this is grappa, it's not. And if it were grappa, and if it actually were grappa and I thought it were water, it still wouldn't be water. So there is an external reality that exists, but it exists in dependence, see, of our inner reality. And we can spend hours and hours on details, but just in a few words, we live reality through ourselves, through this subjective reality. But when I ask you, if you see that person in front of you, actually, what I'm asking you is, do you see the person that I see? When I ask you, can you do you hear the sound of the singing bowl? I'm asking you, do you hear the sound that I am hearing? Because our perception and everyone's perception, we what what we hear, is it the sound that we hear or is it the sound that is? What's our immediate perception? That's the person that I see, or I'm seeing what is? Or rather, a subjective reality appears to us as being objective, and we relate to this subjective reality as if it were objective, and we believe in this appearance, and we relate accordingly. So in other words, we live a reality that is subjective, but we live it as if it were objective. And this is a form of ignorance. And that third seal says nothing exists in an autonomous, objective way. Everything exists in an interdependent way through causes and conditions, parts and whole, observer, object of perceiver, object of perceiver. But so even if it appears as such, everything is empty of inherent existence. When we get angry, for example, our object of anger, does it feel to us as if it's objective or subjective? I mean, I don't want to get angry. What would happen if we were able to deconstruct the objectivity of this object of anger and understand beyond the conceptions that it's subjective? Then anger wouldn't have any legs to stand on. Attachment, jealousy, envy, etc. They all depend on this objective appearance as being real. So the third seal talks about the reality of everything, that we live in a reality that is mutually dependent, where everything is in constant interaction and everything depends on something else. Nothing exists autonomously, objectively. If someone wants to deepen their understanding, there are many, many texts, even antique texts and more modern texts. Recently, I read, now it's more than a year, a book of by Carlo Rovelli called Helgoland. He's an Italian physicist, and this is a book dedicated to quantum physics. But there's a chapter that he dedicates to Nagarjuna, and it's not the same, but it's extremely close to the way the Madhyamika Prasangika school of Buddhism explains a reality. That was just in a few words. The fourth seal: beyond suffering, there is peace. Peace. What does this one mean? It means that each one of us has a mental reality, a physical reality, a psychophysical reality, And given that they're in constant interaction, body and mind, they are constantly transforming, and they follow the interactions. We're made up of habits on a physical level, mental level, emotional level. The more I repeat something, the more natural that thing becomes, the easier it becomes. The more I get angry, the more I will get angry. The more I think, the easier it becomes to think. So the more I complain, the easier it becomes to complain. So our mind, our body, our being is interdependent, and it's in constant transformation. And this allows us to transform in a virtuous way, a healthy way, to be able to actually eliminate the causes of suffering, by developing their opposite, the qualities. It's what allows us to actually get out of this cycle of suffering and reach this so-called nirvana, going beyond suffering. How? By stopping to nourish our negative conditionings that generate suffering, and by cultivating our qualities that lead to well-being and happiness. And here we 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 work on our we work on the path, we work on our conduct, and on the tools. So this fourth seal that's fundamental says we can all do it. The fourth seal says it's possible to reach a deep state of peace and joy and satisfaction. Everyone is able to do it. Everyone can do it because we're interdependent. Because our being is in constant transformation according to the interactions. And this brings us to a very important point, which is we should we should believe in ourselves too. Allow ourselves to dream. When we look around and we see all these images, here in particular, it's just full of images. These images, most of them, they're not gods that we should venerate. They're archetypes. They represent our qualities developed to the maximum potential, as if they were here to say, like testimonials. We were able to do it, you can do it too. The Buddhas of the various colors represent the qualities that we have, but that we can develop to their maximum potential. Green is the power of realization, the clarity of what we should do, this ability to rejoice and to celebrate. Yellow, generosity, humbleness, equality. Blue, love, compassion, patience, stability, joy. And red, satisfaction, concentration, healthy communication. And white, wisdom, a correct view of reality, inner space. That's in a very simple way. Of course, we can go into more detail, but this shows us that we can do it. And the Buddha is none other, to simplifying even too much, but a Buddha is a representation of what we can become. It's like going into the university of it's like going to a university hospital, and I see a doctor, and I want to study medicine. I want to become a doctor. I see a doctor and I say, I can do it too. So this takes us to the fundamental point of having faith in ourselves. And that's what very often is what is missing. Often we say, oh, it would be wonderful, but I'm not able. Instead, you are. And the only reason why Buddha taught everything that he taught. The other day, yesterday, I was reading a sutra. It was this enormous sutra. I was reading the English translation. When people ask me, what's the Buddhist, the Bible, there are 108 volumes. It's infinite, infinite number of teachings. Buddha gave us such a vast amount of teachings. Why? Because he trusted that each one of us could do it. We're able to change our worldview and reach a state of peace. And the reason why these teachings have been taught generation after generation, handed down all the way to us, is because there is trust. There's this belief that we can reach a state of greater peace and satisfaction and happiness, free from suffering. So the objective that we have here in Albagnano, that I personally have, is absolutely not to create a Buddhist world. I don't think that a Buddhist world would necessarily be a better world, but I'm convinced that it would be better if we could have a world with more love, more respect, more satisfaction, more stability, more joy, more peace. And I'm convinced that Buddhist teachings are an excellent tool to reach that goal. So in essence, when we ask what Buddhism is, the tools that Buddha transmitted from generation to generation all the way to us is to help us reach our own state of peace, satisfaction, starting from the principle that happiness and suffering depend mostly on inner conditions, and we need to work within and through our mental, verbal, and physical conduct. If there's something that has been said today that you think could be of benefit to you, the only thing I ask you is that you try to put it into practice. We were not born as Buddhists. None of us is here because we're showing off. You're showing off we get to show off going to the Buddhist temple. I hope it's not like that. If we're here, it's because we're interested, because we want to learn something. We want to change something within. We know that a religious path transcends, a spiritual path transcends a religion. And if anyone present is a Christian, I rejoice fully, and I think we can share. It's not about, oh, you can do this, you can't do that. No, what I ask for sincerity. Sincerity with yourselves, and because life goes by so quickly and we can't waste any time. Now we conclude here. We'll make a brief dedication, and this afternoon, what time is it? At 3 o'clock there is the refuge ceremony, where we actually formalize those who want to follow these teachings. Normally, it happens after quite a while, after someone gets close to Buddhism and really wants to make this commitment. In the past, it used to be more um, it used to be more of an intimate affair, but now, given the high number of requests and the time, we do it publicly, let's say, um, here. And if you are curious and you want to come, you're welcome. There's absolutely no pressure whatsoever to come, to do it. One who wants to take refuge should have elaborated this idea within personally. And, and also today in the afternoon, in the Taragompa, there will be the ceremony of Tara. Tara this is the feminine aspect of an enlightened Buddha. Um, let's say she would be the equivalent of the Madonna, if we think of Christianity. And there are prayers that are very useful when there are times of need, from health to many other things. We call on Tara with prayer, and through this prayer we connect to something healthy, virtuous. We direct our virtuous thoughts, our thoughts for someone, for something. There are many, many benefits. So today, this afternoon, there will be the ceremony of Tara, after which we will begin this recitation of the prayer called the 21 Taras that will go on all night until tomorrow morning at 11, and including the different chant leaders who will stay all night. Okay, so now it's time for our own dedications.
Rapten chi namkar tinle chokchur gepa dan losan tempe drome sasum ki drowe munsela tato ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dan drame chiki pela longche ching sada lamge yente rabzone dorje change kopa nyurtoba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin yinsen takto delek pe koncho sumki chingilo koncho sumki ngodrubo tsol koncho sumki trashi shum.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Bon appétit.
Have a good lunch. Thank you, everyone.